Hello and welcome to another episode, and this time I would like to refresh a little bit the resolution, the camera and the whole situation, because I think it's a good idea to go first into Cinema 4D and check what you really need before you go capturing. And if you wonder why I stay here in Cinema 4D instead of using my camera and go out and capture, because in the moment you just capture, you might get not the right information in your camera. And I want to go with 4 different cameras here into the game to explore exactly what I have in mind. Before I go here to my 4 cameras with the different movements and field of views, I want to explore, of course, shortly the scene here that I have set up with different sizes of objects, and here a little figure to have just a reference in the scene. It's always a good idea if you have something human-sized related to put this figure here, and when you call this figure up, it has normally 600 centimeters or meters or whatever you have set up, but 600 is the unit, and of course this here is set up to 175 centimeters. And that is pretty much an average size from my point of view. And this gives us then a relation to the objects here. And the objects by itself, of course, show a texture always in relation to the resolution that I have set up here. For example, 2K in standard cinema aspect ratio. And 2K means that we have a horizontal resolution of 2048 pixels. That might vary in your case, of course. And important to that is the size of the object, how the texture is scaled on it, and the relation to the camera distance and the field of view. So quite some factors in the whole equation. And on the end, you want to have, of course, a very fast answer. What is working for you and what do you need? As we are here in the capture series, this is the first step, so you know what you really need, and in the moment you know exactly what you need, you can shoot for it. Otherwise you shoot maybe 10 different ways just to be safe. That's maybe nice to have, but not very efficient. You make your pick what is more important to you. So let's find out what is inside of the material, and I have prepared here something which I will show you soon. And I open this window here so you have a better view to the texture. What I normally do to create something like this here is I first set a size into the world. That means in this case 512 by 512, and with 8 fields here in each direction I have then per square 64 pixels. And so in the moment I know exactly what I have here. I can say instantly when I have an image that is rendered here from this scene in Photoshop, I can measure exactly what I need and can compare this with the resolution that I have. How do I create these things? Simply said, I use a gradient vertically with 2 colors, and with 2 different colors a horizontally layered gradient on top of that, so 2 gradients like a cross. Then you can use maybe the difference, multiply or screen or whatever you have and what makes the most sense or the nicest colors. And then you go to mosaic and you set up here these mosaic fields, and then with find edge and all these things you can create finally something like this. The finer patterns here I have created in 64 by 64 square as pattern, and this pattern overlaid over the whole picture. The numbers, of course, are manually set. There is no automatic to say, hey, fill me all these squares. It might be a little bit work, but in the moment you have your own file that works for you with the size and the scale of your scene that you have at the moment or all the time, then you can say very fast what is needed for the current project or object in this case. So when we see here 1 square, we know this has 64 pixels, and the rule of thumb is what we have finally here in the picture should be fed by a texture that is 1.5 times higher in resolution, because no pixel ever will go on a pixel in the final rendering. So it's always a mixture, and when we have at least 1.5 higher the resolution, any texture on an object that creates a parallax will give you a better result than a one-to-one relationship, because that never fits exactly on top of each other. That was in Refresher. I've said that in a theoretical part already. Sorry for the time waste when you have that in mind very clearly. What I want to do here is just check out what the difference makes when the camera moves with a different field of view. And here I have my main camera, and this is set with a standard DSLR full frame sensor in mind, and the focal length is then 36. Normally 35 is the standard, so it's a wide angle lens, or considered as a wide angle, and it doesn't matter which field of view it has, it matters the combination of all of that. So when it moves, for example here, we would have the need to have a lower resolution for these textures than we have maybe when we go closer. And always keep in mind, when you have set up your scene and your camera move is nice and the texture works nicely, then of course the client comes and said, oh, we need a little bit more, we need maybe 180 frames, and you know what, I want to go really close then on this, because that's our main thing now, we have made decisions, and then you see this texture won't work for your needs anymore, it looks a little bit shaggy, and then you're already on the end, you have to go out again and shoot again. That's maybe not the ideal situation. That is why I'm talking here again about it, even if it sounds more theoretical, but that knowledge is the first part for the shooting session, to be really clear what you need finally. So I've stopped that here on a very specific position. We will move this later on a little bit more. And I have created here another camera. And you can see the axis is exactly on the same spot, but I have called this long, and 135mm is certainly a longer lens, not the longest possible of course, but considered the longer lens when you have 3 lenses in your kit: wide, normal and long. And normal is not all what the eye can see, but it follows the rays that you normally would have. An eye has roughly set 180 degrees, but you have only a small spot that you really take care of. So the long lens here gives you a complete different picture than this one here. And you can see here, this is the field of view that we have from that camera. That's why I have this on here, this square. And same position, it means the same distance, but a different field of view in our animation results in the need for a much higher resolution for this texture here. This looks relatively sharp, but I see already some jagginess here. And when I go back to this camera, then I can see here in this area with the same final resolution here, that looks just nice. So the distance is important, the field of view is important, and of course the size of the object when I fill the whole object with one texture is also important. There's a relation between all of these factors. When I move this now with the long lens on, you will see that I have here already a complete different picture from the whole scene. I go always very close with the same position in mind. I have created then of course something that is parallel to this. I have taken here a null object and moved all these 2 cameras back into Z or Z direction. And let's have a look to these guys. This would be here the standard camera again. When I click here, click there, then you can see I have here my other cameras. They look very small now. And all these textures here, they look very nice. I guess we can live with a very low resolution here. But anything in the foreground here will suffer, and everything in the background will suffer here as well. That was the case as well with the other camera. So we have limitations here, and we use always the same camera. Let's have a look to the long lens here. That was this one, and we click here to render it, and the background is now completely blurry. The foreground looks nice, even if we saw here already some problems. I go back now here to my standard camera where we started from, and then I want to have a look to some examples with real textures. With this texture we have of course an easy life here to decide if it is enough or not, because we can measure that in a good way. We have numbers here on the end when we make our test renderings. And we need of course a camera that goes a little bit closer. So let's have a look here when we use this camera, and maybe we put this to this position here. Let's render this in 2K, and then we can see maybe how much we have already problems here in the background. This problem here is maybe more an MIP or MIP problem, because we have many parts in a small space. And we can see here some jagginess, as shown before. Let's have a look at 200%, and when I go here right into it, this is not nice. If you have nothing else and you need exactly this size and the camera and the field of view, I would go maybe with the shortcut and scale it up in Photoshop. Sharpen it a little bit, even if that goes completely against what I have said in anything in the theoretical part. But if you have nothing else, my way would always over Photoshop to do this. I wouldn't wait until Cinema 4D does it for me at any time in each picture. I think you get maybe perhaps a better result if you do a little bit manual love to this picture before you imported it. But this is not acceptable. This looks more like a box blur, which is a very fast and cheap blur, and a nice upscaled picture might have a little bit more quality. So back to 100%, and this time I go here to my material, double click and go here into my layer, and I've prepared here already something, and this is our stone picture here that I have discussed before. This is 5616 pixels wide, so it should have a sufficient resolution here. Let's render this, and I haven't changed anything else. And you can see here already in the background it's pretty blurry, it's not acceptable. And again here, this is not a nice bokeh or depth of field blur. This is a little bit boxy here, to say the term of it. It's fast blur in After Effects, for example. And when I go here to 200%, the foreground looks nice because it's over 10 times higher in resolution, and then the checkerboard, it's acceptable, and I think we can work with that. But for the background, with that scale, even with the long distance, this isn't working at all. I think we have problems with that. The figure here itself works fairly good. I have no problems here. So last but not least, we come to the tree texture here. And the tree texture, when I click here on the little icon, we can get here the resolution 4K. And it's just a JPEG for the demo here, because I only want to check how the resolution works. Let's render this in the picture viewer. And then we get here our result, I hope very quickly. And we can see here, as it is in 4K, we have in the background that blockiness. We have these stripes and crosses in it. Not very nice, though 4K for this is not enough. So we can see anything that goes more into 6K for this setup is much nicer. And even here on the figure with 200%, we are not really into the game here at all. On the cube, again, we have maybe no problems with this distance, with this field of view, and with the scale and object size here. And so you can see it's quite something to explore. It's not easy to say which texture is finally the one that fits to all situations. And I encourage you only to set up a scene where you go always a little bit closer, a little bit within smaller field of view to the objects, because then you can see really if you have some wiggle room or not. This was only the primer before we started the long capture series. And one word to the capture series, because normally one would think I go into a capture session and then I discuss how I develop this. But then I have always to explain during the development what I would do in case of. And all the parts that I have created here, for example with the stones or with other parts with these walls here, are normally to fill in the problems that I have encountered that I want to discuss, of course. And before I have not discussed all the problems or solutions, at least that I think are solutions, I can't really go into the processing mode, because then I would double exactly all what I would say then later on in the next capture series. So there might be a different perspective on this, how to do it in which sequence, but you can of course jump between these things and get your sequence of tutorials in the way you like it. Thanks for listening. Have fun with it. Bye bye.